The Shermans tried to ignore the wolf incident. It had been too surreal. One of their new neighbors remarked casually to them a few days later that their land was home to a herd of large wolves. They were relieved to hear that their family was not a party to some collective delusion. Other people had seen the wolves too. A few weeks later, Terry's wife was driving in her gray Chevette back to their homestead. She was coming home from her new job with the local mortgage company. She had opened the gate to the property and closed it behind her. As she sat in the car, she noticed a movement to her left in her peripheral vision. She gasped. The wolf was huge, and it had silently approached within 30 feet of her. Now it stood outside her window. As she stared into the friendly light blue eyes of the huge animal, she felt a knot of fear tighten. The animal's head stood over the roof of her car. This was no ordinary wolf. It resembled the bulletproof animal they had encountered only a few weeks previously. Easily visible in the gathering twilight was another animal, all black. It stood farther away from the car and appeared more reserved. It was large, but not quite as big as the wolf. It looked like a very weird dog, but unlike any she had ever seen. Perhaps it was an exotic breed created by centuries of mating on the nearby Ute Indian reservation? Maybe one of her Ute neighbors owned this wolf? The dog's head was much too large for its body, but the body was still big. Now thoroughly alarmed, she slammed the gas pedal with her foot and drove quickly along the last half-mile to the homestead. She made a mental note to complain to the local tribal office in Fort Duchesne the following day. No matter how placid and tame these huge wolves appeared to be, they were still wild animals. She was determined that they would not be allowed to roam freely on the property, especially since the family was preparing to move their extremely expensive herd of registered animals onto the grass fields within a few more weeks. Winter was approaching. She was really puzzled the next day. When her polite requests to rein in the wolves were met with blank stares and uncomprehending silence at the tribal office. Nobody owned any wolves around here, she was told. In fact, wolves had not been seen in this part of Utah for 70 years. The last wolf in Utah had been shot in 1929. These events happened a full year before. A herd of gray wolves was transplanted into Yellowstone Park and into central Idaho in 1995, and in December 2002, one of those wolves would be caught in a trap near Ogden, Utah. In 2004, a couple of wolves were spotted around Vernal. The soft-spoken tribal official eventually told her that she must be mistaken. Perhaps she had seen a coyote? Terry's wife was furious. She left the tribal office convinced that somebody was not telling the truth. She remembered that the huge animal had to bend down to breathe on her car window. It was about 4 times the size of any wolf she had ever heard about, and the disquieting incident of the bulletproof wolf came back to haunt the family. They saw the huge animals in the distance a couple more times in the next few weeks. Then they seemed to disappear from the face of the earth. The family became so busy with ranch chores that she quickly forgot about the huge animals. Out of sight was definitely out of mind. She enjoyed their tranquil countryside far away from any snoopy neighbors. Every evening after finishing all her chores, she liked nothing better than to walk on the property, when she could look at the stars in a pristine dark sky. There was no pollution in this part of Utah. Her sharp eyes were able to pick up the green-red star Betelgeuse when it was visible in the night sky. She loved the silence. In late 1994, on her second walk along the top of the 200-foot ridge, she was humming joyfully to herself when she felt a huge rush of wind, as something very big flew past her, just missing her. She ducked instinctively. Whatever it was, it had missed her by a few feet. Whatever had flown past her had created significant turbulence. It must have been pretty big, she thought to herself. There was no other noise apart from that strange rush of wind. A bat? It was much too big and too fast for a bat. This thing was very solid and bulky, and it was flying fast. 5 minutes later, as she resumed her brisk walk, it happened again. This time it was even closer, again she ducked. She should have seen some kind of silhouette, because this time the thing was flying west directly toward the light of the setting Sunday. There was enough light still in the sunset to spot something that big, but she saw nothing. She felt a twinge of uneasiness. Could it have been a bird? A lot of birds don't fly in the darkness. She was puzzled. She turned around to go back. This was getting creepy. She breathed a sigh of relief when she got back to her family. She decided not to tell them. During the days when Terry was out working on the ranch, and the kids were at school, she began to seriously question her memory. She would leave a kitchen utensil on the counter, go outside for a moment, and return to find the utensil missing. It would later turn up somewhere unexpected. She couldn't figure it out. She began to suspect that one of her kids was playing games with her. Similar oddities happened a couple of times per week. She was getting increasingly worried about her memory, when one evening Terry stormed in and demanded to know who had hidden the post digger. He was irate. Both kids looked up from their homework. They were puzzled. Terry's wife told him that all three had been in the house for the past couple of hours. Terry said that he had left the 70-pound implement on the ground and gone to his truck to get a wrench, returned a couple of minutes later, and it was gone. He was angry because he wanted to finish mending a broken fence, and it was almost dark. The family went outside to help him look. 30 minutes later they gave up. Terry was silent and frustrated the whole evening. 2 evenings later, he rushed in and demanded to know who had taken his pliers. He had left them on a fence post, turned around, and when he turned back, they were gone. He was seething. Again, the family looked for the pliers, but to no avail. It was then that she decided to fess up. The same thing had been happening to her, she explained. She reeled off multiple instances. The family stared at her as she spoke. Terry grew quiet. The look on his face told her everything. He had begun to suspect that something was terribly wrong. Shortly afterward he went outside to think. She knew better than to come out to talk to him. This was not the time for a family conference. There was too much to do. Terry had finally moved his entire herd of high-end, registered breeding Black Angus and Simmental cattle onto the new ranch. Around the same time, Dave, Terry's nephew, had arrived to visit with the family for a few weeks. Dave was not exactly the outdoor type, having lived most of his life in the city. Terry was determined to break him into the ranching lifestyle during his stay. One night, he told his son Tad and Dave to accompany him on an outdoor jaunt. Terry knew that Dave was apprehensive of the dark, so he wanted to break the youngster of this fear. The three began walking casually through the property to check on the cows. It was a beautiful dusk, and Terry was appreciating the lovely clear sky that still held some light. A few hundred feet to the north, the ridge was getting darker by the minute. A flash of annoyance hit Terry as he spied the lights of a tree-passing RV about half a mile to their west. He had little patience for trespassers who ignored private property and hunted on other people's land. He had let it go a few times before when he had seen distant lights on his property, but this time, he was going to tell these louts off. He pointed out the RV to the two teenagers, and the three of them increased their pace. When they were about 200 yards away, the RV started moving away from them. Terry was momentarily puzzled. How could it have seen them? Perhaps the trespassers had night vision equipment, Sherman thought to himself. He and the boys broke into an easy jog. He did not want this idiot to start breaking fence lines as the RV tried to escape. The headlamp in front and the red light behind were moving very smoothly now. Terry wondered why the vehicle was not bouncing over the ruts. Suddenly the lights from the object seemed to rise a few feet from the ground. Terry's brow puckered. "What's going on?" Tad muttered. They were covering the ground quickly now, trying to catch the RV. They could see that it had gradually increased its pace, as it maintained the same distance from them. All three were now running, and again they could see the lights moving a few feet off the ground. As they came to one of the fences through their property, it dawned on Terry what was happening. The thing was somehow lifting itself over the fence lines. It had already gone over a couple with apparent ease. This was when he felt the first chill. How could an RV be climbing over fences? The chase continued, and Terry was breathing heavily. They had now entered the last pasture before the very end of his property, and that pasture was bound on the western end by a line of Russian olives placed thickly together, and right behind a stout 5-foot-high barbed wire fence. Terry grunted with satisfaction as he ran. The bastards were trapped. He still could not hear the vehicle's engine, and he wondered why. They were running hard in the darkness now, and the red tail light of the vehicle was still about 200 yards in front. Terry kept waiting for the object to slow down as it neared the impenetrable barrier that formed the western limit of his property. The boys were about 10 yards in front of him, and he was gasping for air now. But since they were only moments from catching these intruders, Sherman kept running. He kept glancing down at the rough rutted terrain as he ran, making sure that any obstacles were not going to trip him up. Suddenly, a loud gasp from the boys made him look up. The RV was now definitely in the air. All three stopped to war with the red light on its tail. It climbed smoothly, slowly, and silently toward the top of the tree line. Those trees were more than 50 feet high. As the object crested the tree line, the bewildered trio saw the shape of the vehicle perfectly, silhouetted against the horizon. It was no RV. The object was roughly oblong-shaped like a large refrigerator, with a headlight in front and a red light behind. All three watched in complete silence, as the object slowly disappeared over the trees in the distance. It was flying smoothly and slowly, almost casually. There was no sound. Terry's breathing was still coming in painful gulps. He felt cold chills running through his body, even as he sweated profusely. The boys, still gazing open-mouthed, turned to Sherman looking for an explanation. Even from several feet away, he could see that Dave was crying softly in the darkness. The 14-year-old was obviously very frightened, and was deeply disturbed by something this bizarre. Terry knew that his son was made of sterner stuff, but Tad too was waiting for an explanation. "I have no idea," Terry muttered as he turned away, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. What was really spooky was that they never heard the sound of an engine, even from 150 yards away. What will I tell my wife Ellen? He wondered as they trudged back. His mind was racing, looking for some kind of rational explanation for what they had seen. Some kind of military exercise out in the wilds of Utah? It made no sense to him. Why would they test exotic hardware on someone's private property? Nothing added up. They walked in silence all the way back to the homestead, the young 14-year-old shivering with fear. Dave's stay would be cut short. His parents let the family know that the youngster would not return to his cousins, while they still lived on that property in Utah. A few weeks later, Terry and his wife Ellen were walking out on the trail, heading west and enjoying the cool air about an hour after sunset. The trail passed close to the ridge that marked the northern boundary of the Sherman property. The bluff was composed of dried mud and sandstone, and was still noticeably red as darkness intensified. Tonight, there was no sign of rain, and the Shermans chatted quietly as they walked. Suddenly a loud metallic sound came from their right, cutting through the nighttime stillness. Startled, they stopped abruptly. Both had an acute hearing. A few seconds later, they heard the noise again. It sounded like metal being banged on metal, and it seemed to be coming from about 100 feet above them in the darkness. Terry was puzzled. What could be making the noise? Ellen clutched his sleeve and silently pointed in front of them. Terry saw the bright light about 100 yards out. It was a vehicle. Probably some miners lost, he said, putting two and two together. They felt slight apprehension as they walked toward it. As the couple approached the object, it lifted off the ground, moved about 50 yards away, and slowly settled back to the ground. "It's that thing Tad and I saw a while back," Terry muttered to his wife. Slowly they walked in the direction of the bright white beam that stabbed the darkness in front of it. They could just make out the refrigerator shape behind the light. And the reddish glow behind the object was familiar to Terry. As they drew nearer, the object again lifted off the ground and glided smoothly away in total silence. Again, they tried to gain ground, but each time the object repeated the frustrating maneuver. It was clearly watching and reacting to them, trying to keep them at arm's length. Beneath his nervousness, Terry felt a spark of outrage. Who the hell do they think they are? He thought angrily. In the distance behind them, they both heard the mysterious metallic sound again. They turned away from the chase momentarily to try to get a fix on the sound. When they turned back, there was no sign of the light in front of them. The vehicle had either turned off its lights or had vanished. Slowly they walked toward the spot where they had last seen it. Nothing stirred in the still night. They passed the spot on the path where it had been, but there were no tracks in the hard-baked mud. They didn't talk much after that, although they walked the entire length of the ranch to the western boundary. The night appeared to have swallowed the mysterious flying refrigerator. Terry knew then for certain that something very unusual was unfolding on the ranch they had purchased just a few months before. It was around this time that the Sherman family first heard the rumors that were circulating in town. Scuttlebutt being whispered in local coffee shops, and stores acknowledged legends told by the Utes about the secret history of the Sherman property. Short, the ranch was considered to be off-limits for tribe members. Peace by the Shermans learned that their land was, and Native Americans would ever foot on it. Why? The Shermans wondered. Nobody would give them a straight answer.